When I was 8, I did what I was used to doing. I took my German Shepherd named Bella into the woods for one of our many spirited adventures. My parents were well off enough to have a bit of woodland, and we lived right in the middle of it. We were miles from any city, so the only thing that could remotely be bad about me and the dog wandering off together was running into wildlife. But I repeat, the dog was a German Shepherd, so she was more than capable of protecting me from any man or animal that would consider doing me any harm. One early evening, we began another adventure. I said goodbye to my mother, and she just told me to be careful and stay near our dog. The usual stuff. Oh, and I needed to be home really soon, since dinner would be done before too long. I was one of the kids who enjoyed to eat, so that mandate was no trouble for me. I let Bella lead the way, letting her sensitive nose do the searching for adventure for us. It didn't take her long to get the trail of something. She sniffed this way and that, looked around with her ears forward, really alert. She then let out a low whine that I wasn't sure how to interpret, and then, without any warning, she bounded off at a quick trot that was hard for me and my stubby legs to keep up with. I called after her, and it did no good. She kept right on going. That wasn't like her. She usually stopped at my command. That's why I never had her on a leash. But something had gotten her so hooked that she wasn't able to set aside the room in her dog brain to listen to me. Frustrated, I set off after her, and in my pursuit, I noted that we were going rather deep into the woods. Deeper than we should have, in view of my mother's admonition to be home in time for supper. She seemed to be stopping just often enough to let me catch up, but as soon as she was back within eyeshot, she was off again. I was getting scared and anxious. I wasn't wanting to get lost or go hungry. Both would have been tragic. She wheeled around one particular clump of trees, and I followed by about 3 seconds. When I had come around her to follow her, she was gone. Nowhere to be found. I couldn't even hear the padding of her feet in the earth. I called out to her, but the stillness announced that she was gone. I couldn't make any sense of what was happening. Had she vanished into thin air? I was starting to cry, and I walked around in circles, unsure of what to do. Should I go home for dinner without my dog? Would I be even able to find my way home? Something wet then hit me on the head, and I thought that it was rain or bird poop or something. When I wiped it off my head and I looked at my hand, my palm was red with smeared blood. Looking up, I had found my dog. She was above me, in the clutches of something that I remember as vividly now as the moment that I first saw it. It had very long arms and legs that were completely and entirely wrapped around my dog. As thin as they were, they should have been weak, but they were strong enough to completely arrest my dog and hold her in place so that she couldn't fight or even cry out. The face of the thing was pointed, and when I say that, think of the cartoon depiction you saw of a devil, and the way that everything about the head seemed to point downwards the chin. That's how this thing looked. 3 limbs locking my dog down, while one slender foot grasped the tree branch and gnarled, awful teeth digging into my dog's neck, lapping up the blood. I was caught somewhere between outrage and terror, and I was perfectly helpless to do anything, regardless of what I felt. Blood was beginning to fall more and more, and I just ran in neurotic little circles, screaming up at this thing to stop what it was doing. It gave me sidelong glances that were nothing but pure evil. It refused to look at me directly, absorbing and dining on my dog's life. When it was done, it dropped poor Bella, who fell down to the ground head first. This thing wiped its mouth, and had the longest forearm I could ever imagine on anything humanoid. I didn't know many cuss words at the time, but I hurled all of them at this thing that had just killed my dog, and then dumped her like a sack of dead garbage. I crumpled to the ground and wept so hard I nearly vomited. Well, it turned out that Bella wasn't dead. She stirred, got up on quaking legs, and about that time, my father had come looking for me, since I wasn't home in time. He found me next to Bella, trying to help her stay up, but she just couldn't keep her balance. I told him what I saw, and I think that if he hadn't seen the blood with his very own eyes, he would have spanked me on the spot for making up such ridiculous stories. Not that I think he truly believed me, but I think he could tell there was more to the situation than the active imagination of his son. We eventually got Bella home, and she lived for about 4 more months. Several times, my parents wanted to put her down, but I threw such a fit at the very idea. Something must have put her in her system, like a parasite or disease. She was just never the same, always sleeping and not eating, at least much. She died in her sleep one night, after 4 days of eating nothing but a few slurps of water. So, evidently, blood-sucking monsters are very real. I know what I saw, and the effects of it are still very much with me to this day. I don't do the woods anymore, and I certainly can't bear to own another dog. Even though I'm a grown man, that monster sucked something out of me too. My soul. And no, before you think so, it looked nothing like a chupacabra. This thing looked different entirely. Much more demonic, I guess. It wasn't unusual for me to see all kinds of wildlife from the school bus when going to school to and from, especially on the way, early in the morning. I would see red-tailed hawks, raccoons, and I'd even spot the occasional bear. They weren't shy about approaching people, so you could see them really up close by driving by. Our community was surrounded by thick woods, so close encounters with animals wasn't exactly unusual. It also wasn't as difficult to live with as you might assume. There were exceptions, of course. Our school playground was barriered in the surrounding timber, and it wasn't any place for kids. That was in the days before the fence around the perimeter. I guess they had thought that the trees were good enough, but it apparently hadn't occurred to anybody that there was more to it than just keeping the kids in. They also needed to keep kids and dangerous animals out. The area of the playground closest to the trees was also the emptiest. No playground equipment, no toys or jungle gyms. They did not want to encourage kids to play too close to the trees. These were kids. They didn't need encouragement. They can find their way into trouble without the need of any extra help. I was a kid, and I was no different. Me and a few other kids got the idea that we would taunt one of the supervisors and then make a mad dash for the back 40 of the playground. Then, enter the woods and see how far they would chase us. We were that special breed of kids that was even more short-sighted in our decisions than most others. So we went through with it. One of my friends went up to the old lady supervisor that was especially grouchy all the time, and he stomped her foot. The rage was instantaneous. If he hadn't gotten the head start that he did, she might have nabbed him within the first 10 seconds of the chase. But he managed to stay about a second and a half ahead of her. He beelined for us, and we were waiting for him at the forest edge. His eyes were perfect circles of terror mixed with excitement, and he waved at us with both arms. We knew what to do. We dashed into the forest, and he followed. Remember what I said about short-sighted decisions? We didn't actually plan about how far we would run into the forest, or exactly where we would go once inside. We were too caught up in the excitement of one-upping the adults to think that far. We ended up running off in entirely different directions. I didn't know this until I was finally out of breath, looking around for my friends. I didn't know where I was, and I didn't know where they were. The woods around me were quiet. I couldn't hear any running, shouting, or anything. I was growing afraid and wanted to find my way back to the school and get back to class, and hope that nobody noticed that I'd been gone when it was time to go back inside. I panicked on a low level, darted in a random direction, praying that it would take me back to school. When I ran around one large tree, I was confronted by the largest black bear I had ever seen. They're even bigger when you're a kid. I truly thought that it was the end, and I was going to be devoured in the woods by this thing. But the bear never attacked. It sat on its hind legs, looking dazed, sleepy. The longer it stayed that way, the more I wondered if it were somehow friendly. I was thrilled with the idea at the time of bringing a friendly bear back to the playground to show off to the entire school. In my bravery, I dared to step closer to the bear, but he didn't seem interested in me. In fact, he appeared to be dizzy. That's when I noticed that he was wearing something like a white necklace, which puzzled me. The bear attempted to get up on all fours, which made him lurch to the side, which finally allowed me to see what was on his back. At first, I thought it was a person. He had his face buried in the bear's back, and I thought he was giving the bear a hug. I knew that wasn't the case the moment that he looked up at me. The face was like the rest of the body, impossibly long and white. There were shallow veins in the bald head that were the sickliest color of blue that I've ever seen. The eyes were so red that they were brown, and the whites were a diseased-looking pink. The mouth and chin and the neck were drenched in blood. The bear's blood. I noticed for the first time how the bear's fur was waterlogged with its own blood. This monster hissed before plunging back down. I screamed, panicking completely, howling and running for all I was worth in whichever direction I could run. I lost my footing, tumbled down into a steep ravine where I broke my ankle and blacked out. That's where they found me when they were out searching. My story went over with them, about the way you'd expect it to. My parents have wondered why I never changed my story all these years, but I doubt that they think about it as much anymore. How was something so frail able to subdue a bear, and why didn't it go after me? I've had nightmares ever since that thing did leap off the bear and clobbered me. Nothing I've seen in real life or in any movies has come close to scaring me the way that did. Yeah, I do watch horror movies from time to time, but each time I do, I think the same thing. I've seen worse, and nothing beats this experience, the scariest one I've ever had. An encounter with something very, very real.